Everyone, welcome back to my channel. It is Victoria here. If you are new to my channel, welcome. And today I'm going to be answering all your questions related to mental health. So I put on my Instagram story questions for you guys to ask me, and I'm going to go and dive right in them. But before I do, I just wanted to put one disclaimer out there. Someone did ask me a question on the Instagram, basically saying what credentials do I have to be talking about mental health or giving advice. So I just want to put it out there that I do not have a degree in I don't have a medical degree. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I have absolutely no credentials when it comes to mental health. And I feel like I always put that disclaimer out when I'm discussing this topic, but I feel like because it's something I personally go through, and I'm always sharing my personal experience. When I give advice, it's based on, you know, my personal experience, and I'm also always urging people to like go to therapy, see a professional. So I just want you to have that disclaimer in your mind before we dive into this, because I don't want you thinking that like what I'm giving you is like actual advice that you should be taking, because you should always resort back to a medical professional before you know, decide on anything to do with mental health. But I just want to be able to talk about this. This is something that's so important to me, and there's a lot of stigma that goes around with mental health, so it's something that I'm very passionate about and breaking those barriers down. So I don't think I'm going to be stopping talking about it anytime soon, despite having some criticism. So let's get to it. So I feel like this is a good one to start off, and it is, what's a way to break down the stigma with meds and feel more open discussing taking them? So I feel like with anything, mental health is a very taboo subject, and there is a lot of stigma, but in order to reduce stigma, you have to bring it into light and keep discussing it. So the more we talk about it, the more we reduce that stigma. In terms of medication, there's always going to be, not always, but for a long time there has been a lot of stigma related to medication. And I think in terms of breaking down the stigma, you just have to be open about it, educate people on it. I feel like a lot of people have very strong misconceptions about what medication is and what it can do for you. So I feel like ways to break it down is to just be more vocal about it and to be more open about it and to talk about it. So I think talking about it is so important. Question 2, do you get high levels of depression and anxiety with PMS? So a lot of anxiety and depression can be hormone related. So I think that is something you should dive into with your doctor before you resort to any kind of medication if you're dealing with, you know, anxiety and depression, because it could be due to some kind of hormonal imbalance. But yes, before my period, my anxiety goes through the roof. Like 2 to 3 days before I get my period, my anxiety is awful, and then I find once I get my period, I kind of slip into a bit of a depressed state. But I'm very mindful of this, and I know like when I start feeling that way, that I have to take into consideration that yes, I'm about to get my period, and also, you know, practice more methods that help me reduce that anxiety. Because I'm on medication, I feel like it does help with that. I don't get as bad of a spike of anxiety, but when I was off my medication, 2 to 3 days before my period was really tough for me. So yes, I do. That question, I guess I answered it. Did you ever get intrusive thoughts with anxiety? So yes. When I was off my medication last year, I had terrible intrusive thoughts. My anxiety was so bad that I was having a lot of intrusive thoughts. And basically, intrusive thoughts are unwanted thoughts that you're having constantly and you have no control over them. Like, just keep happening. So I felt like for me, my mind was like just going over and over, obsessively thinking about these things that I did not want to be thinking about. And that in return was causing me a lot of internal stress. So this is actually pretty much one of the main reasons that I decided to go back on meds, is because I was having such bad obsessive thinking. My anxiety was really taking control of my life, and that was kind of a turning point where I knew like I needed to get back on medication, because I could not live like that. I either wanted to sleep to quiet my mind if I could sleep, or I honestly didn't know how I could continue on living that way, because it was just so painful having those thoughts and like the stress that it was causing to me. So yes, and you don't have to have, you know, like I feel like a lot of people think that if you have OCD, if you have that diagnosis, that you're gonna have like the intrusive thoughts, because that's common with that. But if you have any kind of anxiety, you can also get them. So anxiety kind of can stem from so many different places, so that's why it's so different for everyone. But yes, I did, and that was one thing that when I went back on my medication, it really helped me. Can you describe your anxiety symptoms and its triggers? So triggers, I'm not going to dive into all my triggers, but some triggers are, you know, like social settings. If I have to travel and I'm not like comfortable in the environment, if I have to do things that I'm afraid to do, but that's just a few of them. I don't really want to dive into all the triggers because they are quite personal to me. But in terms of the symptoms I get, it kind of depends. So anxiety can be triggered by a variety of things, and your symptoms can be very different. So in terms of just anxiety and not going into like a panic attack, I would say I can get really irritable to the point where I'm just like very angry and irritable and annoyed, but for no particular reason. I can get extremely emotional. So I remember one time I went to this one store and I felt just really uncomfortable and my anxiety was really building up. And the moment I left the building, like left the store, I just broke down. So I was very emotional. I just couldn't stop crying. It was like finally once I was in like a safe place, I could just like have an outlet for all that emotion. I find I'll just be like obsessively thinking about things. Sometimes I'll completely detach from the situation. So like I feel like I'm not really there, and I do that just to protect myself. What else? So those are some, I'd say, some of the symptoms I get in terms of anxiety. And then usually is a lot of overthinking and analyzing situations and obsessively thinking about different scenarios. But I would say that is, in terms of my anxiety symptoms, that would be somewhat of some of them. Is it ever too much having to uphold a certain image and standard on Instagram? Yes, I'm not gonna lie. I never really went into, social media is having to, how I've come about to have, a following on social media has been just kind of happened for me. So I feel like with any type of career you have, in terms of, let's say if you're top of your business, or you're top in your class, or you're on social media and you have an image, it's pressure that you put on yourself. And a lot of times it's not even necessarily pressure from other people, it is a lot of internal pressure. So for me, that was a big reason why I took a complete step back from social media last year. I was in a really bad place mentally, and the thought of even posting on social media made me so anxious that I couldn't do it. I couldn't even post. And I used to like to vocalize a lot of things, and I would write and journal, and I was just so anxious that even like the thought of writing made me feel even worse. So I kind of just took a step back. So yes, it can be difficult, but I think you have to just remember that if people are only following you because of what you look like, then that's not necessarily the following I want. I want to connect with people. I want to have genuine connections, and I also want people to follow me because of the messages I'm sharing. I'm either motivating them to, work hard in the gym and feel good about themselves, or I'm helping them with their mental health. I'm vocalizing things, and I just want people to be following me for the right reasons. So people who unfollow me because, let's say, my body changes, or I'm not the standard they want to look up to, that's fine. That's not exactly the following I want anyways. But yes, it can be stressful at times, and it's important to not put too much pressure on yourself, because I feel like a lot of people, especially when you're like a driven person, you do put a lot of pressure on yourself. I'm a perfectionist, so I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I have to know when to not put the pressure on myself and to take a step back. What do you do when you feel like you're burning out? So for me, having a lot of social interaction makes me feel burnt out. I'm very much an introvert. I love to be social, but I have to also take a step back, have my alone time, and recharge. So when I start to feel like I'm doing too much and I'm burning out, even like with social interactions, with the gym, with work, I have to make sure that I take a step back. And I know that can be very difficult because a lot of the times you don't have the opportunity to take a step back, but it's very, very important that you give yourself that mental and physical recharge, because eventually you will completely burn out, and you want to give yourself that recharge before you get to that point. So it's so important to make time for yourself. I feel like it's very true that you need to fill up your own cup before you can fill up others. You need to be taking care of yourself before you can really fully take care of others. So for me, I take a step back. I give myself the time I need. I take some time off training. If I need to, I take some time off posting on social media, creating content. I have to do what's best for me. If I am feeling overwhelmed by social interaction, I take some alone time. When was the first time you had an anxiety attack / you recognized you were facing anxiety? Okay, so I started getting anxiety attacks when I was about 10 or 11, and then the one that was very traumatic to me was probably when I was about 12, but I would get them based on performance anxiety. So when I was having swimming and I was racing, I would have them. And basically when you have a panic attack, it happens very suddenly. No actual real danger presented, but you've in your mind believe that there is. So for me, I was a competitive swimmer. I was a very good and strong swimmer, but all of a sudden in the middle of the race, I thought I was gonna drown, or I couldn't breathe, I couldn't catch my breath, and I would have to completely slow down, or sometimes I would stop in the middle of my race, which, as you can imagine, when you're, you know, 10 or 11, that was extremely embarrassing. And trying to make an understanding of what was going on and why I feel like all of a sudden I'm dying in the middle of my race, when I never would really experience that when I was practicing. It was always race-based, so I knew eventually it was described to me that it was performance anxiety and whatnot. And then when I was 12 is when I had a really long anxiety attack. I think it lasted about, a really long panic attack. I think it lasted about an hour, and it was when my brother broke his arm. And this was the one that I remember very traumatically, and I felt like I was dying. I couldn't breathe. I was on the floor asking my dad, crying out, telling him to call an ambulance because I was dying, and I was very emotional, and I was shaking, and it was very traumatic at that time. So yes, I experienced basically anxiety throughout my teenage years, starting at, you know, 10 or 11, based on a lot of times performance anxiety. So it used to be specifically swimming, and sometimes like certain events. Like I remember my best friend's sister cut her foot, and that caused me to have a panic attack. So a lot of the times it was like when things happened, I would have one, but most of the time it was when I was in swim races, and I would never really know when they were gonna happen. They kind of just came on really suddenly, and it wouldn't happen every race. So it was very discouraging and very difficult for me to manage, and that was essentially why I stopped swimming after, you know, 12 years of swimming, is because I just couldn't mentally get over the anxiety that I was having with racing. So that would be kind of when I first started getting panic attacks, and kind of when my anxiety really started. Do you feel that your mental health has hurt friendships, not being able to go out? Yes. I feel like I tend to push a lot of people away when I just get too overwhelmed, or when, like, if I don't see someone for a long time, then I feel like I build up so much anxiety about seeing them that I just keep pushing it off to the point that I just never reach out or see them again. It's really bad, and I feel like over time I've become a lot more aware of it. And I have lost a lot of friends, I feel like, because of my own internal shit and my own internal struggles. So yes, I guess to answer your question, I have lost friendships because of my own anxiety. And I feel like a lot of times people maybe don't view me as like being fun because I don't want to go out all the time. But for me, going out is very, like, a lot of times can be stressful for me. I don't like going to clubs. I don't like, it makes me feel very anxious. And I feel like I let people down sometimes because I don't want to do those things. But that's just my own struggles and stuff I have to work through. But I try not to put myself in situations that make me uncomfortable. But I am trying harder to remain friendships with people, and to not push people away, and to go out of my comfort zone, and to get a little bit more uncomfortable, because it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's just, for me, a lot of times I wouldn't want to deal with it, and I would just push it away. And that's kind of what I end up doing with a lot of things in life. Responsibilities, friendships, things, I just push them away to not deal with them. But the thing is eventually you do deal with them, and if the longer you push things away, the worse it is, and the harder it is to, again, deal with it, and then the anxiety gets even worse. So yes, I do feel like I have hurt friendships in the past, but I feel like I'm a lot more aware of that, and I feel like I'm trying harder not to do that in the future. Have you found that eating a certain way and certain exercise to help your anxiety and depression? So yes, I feel like I could probably eat better to help with my anxiety and depression, but I also feel like there's a fine line with me in terms of getting really fixated on what I'm eating, getting obsessive with what I'm eating, which makes my anxiety actually worse. So for me, I feel like I eat pretty good. I could eat better, but it's what works for me mentally. So I feel like you have to just find what works for you, that you feel good about what you're eating, what you're fueling your body with, but you're not having any kind of anxiety over food, or obsessively thinking about like macros. Like, I don't count macros because that makes me fall into an unhealthy pattern with eating and gives me anxiety. But in terms of exercise, again, like I find I just do what I want to do in the gym and what I enjoy doing, because the moment I start putting like, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this much cardio, it becomes stressful for me, and it makes my anxiety worse. So for me, it's just doing things that I feel like doing instead of forcing me to do stuff. Obviously, if you're trying to reach goals in terms of bodybuilding or performance-based, then that maybe isn't the best approach for you. But in terms of what works for me with a well-balanced like life approach, that is what I do. Do you overthink a lot, If so, how do you control it? Yes, I am an overthinker. I overthink and overanalyze and obsess over everything, but I'm on medication that does help a lot with quieting my mind. So when I was off my medication last year, my mind took complete control and I had absolutely no control over it, and that is why I ended up going back on medication and going back into like therapy regularly. But in terms of what I do now when I'm starting to feel really anxious, I try to keep myself busy. Keeping myself busy really gets my mind off being in my head and like focusing on other things. I also do my mindfulness. I listen to Eli Bay's stuff. I purchased it online, but there's a lot of free resources online like YouTube. I think some of the apps are free, but I like his voice and I like his technique and stuff, and that was what my therapist recommended, so I just purchased his stuff online. It wasn't very expensive, and that's another thing that I use. And also exercise. I feel like when I go to the gym, I can kind of like take my mind off things and focus on like my body and stuff and like pushing it, and that's another thing I would say I do. And connecting with my family. I feel like when I connect with like people I love and have strong relationships with, it can take my mind off everything else. Knowing when to seek professional help versus just regular hormones / anxiety. So obviously, like I said, as a woman and pre-period, you are likely gonna have some kind of hormonal swings that can affect your anxiety and make you either feel anxious or can make you feel depressed, or super emotional, you name it. So I think if it's happening like all the time, more days than none, and it's really interfering with your life, that's when you need to seek out professional help. And this is a question I would also ask your doctor, but for me personally, like it gets to the point where I can't even function, and that was kind of when I knew I needed to get help. It wasn't just like, you know, a few days before my period, or, you know, when I'm ovulating, like certain fluctuations. It was like pretty much every day of the entire month. So that is when I decided, or when I knew I needed to get actual help. Have you ever had to up your depression medication ever? Yes. So again, this is something that you would go over with your doctor or your psychiatrist, but I have gotten to a point where my symptoms haven't gotten better with the medication I was on, and I did have to up it, or I've had to switch medication altogether. Sometimes it's hard to reach out and get help because of fear. What do you recommend? So they are trained to deal with these kind of situations. They know how to deal with these situations, and you're gonna go into it not feeling judged and very comfortable. They should make you feel very comfortable when you're talking about these things. They know how difficult it is for you to be feeling this way and to vocalize about it, especially if it's your first time ever talking about it, and they should make you feel very comfortable in doing so. If you aren't feeling comfortable with the doctor or therapist or whatever you're using, I would recommend reaching out to a different one. Okay, I think this will be the last question for this video, and I think I'm going to do another video just because there's so many questions and so many great questions, so I do want to answer more. But I'm gonna finish off with this one. So, my husband often doesn't believe I have mental illness and thinks I'm making it up. What's the best way to explain it to him? Explain mental illness to someone who doesn't believe it's real. He often makes me feel embarrassed or ashamed. It's so hard. In his culture, it's not, I don't know where that one went. Okay, so first of all, this question kind of upset me personally, because I feel like people who don't believe mental illness is a real thing are very, very naive and uneducated. And I'm not meaning that in an insulting way, but if you are with someone who makes you feel like what you're going through isn't valid and real, I can't even imagine. That would be so difficult. But I think in terms of this particular situation, education is so important. So you have to educate your partner that this is a real thing. It's not, you know, just some made up thing so you can gain attention or whatever you had said that you're making it up, whatever. And the fact that you're being vocal about this and he's still making you feel ashamed and embarrassed, I feel really sorry for you. That's terrible. But I would educate him on what it is. Maybe even go to a therapist and do a double session with you, him, and the therapist, so he can listen from a medical professional that what you're experiencing isn't, you know, in your head made up. It's a real thing. So I think that is what I would do for me personally with Regan, because he doesn't actually have anxiety. I made him watch like some videos on what a general anxiety disorder is, what depression is, etc. I educated him on it, and he doesn't have to 100% understand, as long as he, you know, can A, listen and be supportive and doesn't ever make me feel ashamed or embarrassed about what I'm going through. But for me personally, I feel like educating him would be smart, and also maybe doing a session together with a therapist, or you starting with a therapist yourself and kind of, you know, explaining the dynamic of your relationship, and then having a session with the both of you, just so he can finally kind of be educated and understand the importance of this, the severity of it, and to be able to take this more seriously, because this eventually is going to have an impact on your relationship together if it hasn't already. So I think it's very important that he starts understanding it and having, you know, some compassion and being there for you in a very non-judgmental way. All right, I think I'm gonna finish there for today. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. I will dive into more questions after, because there are still a ton of questions that I haven't even got through. But thank you guys for sharing these questions with me. I know sometimes it can be difficult to, you know, reach out and share things that, you know, might be quite personal or private to you. So I appreciate you doing that, and I hope that I answered your questions to the best of my ability, and I hope it was somewhat insightful. And again, make sure you always reach out for, you know, professional help if you are feeling any of these symptoms, and make sure that you reach out to a loved one or someone who has a professional degree that can help you to the best of their ability. Okay, thank you guys.